Kim Min-ji knew she would die in 30 seconds. The plane was plunging into the abyss of the ocean, the cabin filled with screams and prayers in different languages, and the instruments were flashing red in madness. Through the window she saw the blue surface of the water racing toward them, merciless, endless, ready to swallow them forever. This is the end of my dissertation on marine ecosystems, she thought absurdly, clutching the armrest of her seat. Next to her, Hyun-suk was shouting something, but the roar of the failing engines drowned out all sounds. Somewhere behind, Sun-woo was trying to reach the emergency equipment. Then, darkness. A deafening crash. And nothing more. The piercing howl of the wind and the sound of waves breaking against a rocky shore were the first things Kim Min-ji heard when she regained consciousness. Wet strands of hair clung to her face, and salty water ran down her cheeks, mixing with tears, whether of relief that she was alive, or of terror at the unknown. The bitter taste of seawater lingered in her throat. I'm alive. By some miracle, I'm alive. Fragments of the recent past flashed through her mind, the scientific expedition she had prepared for so long, the joy when she was accepted into the team of promising researchers, the flight over the endless blue ocean, the sudden technical failure, and the helplessness that gripped everyone as the plane began to lose altitude. And the others? Hyun-suk? Sun-woo? With a trembling hand, Min-ji pushed the strands of hair from her forehead and propped herself up on her elbow. Her body convulsed in painful spasms, perhaps a reaction to the stress after the crash. She stared at the ocean, infinite and merciless, ready at any moment to drag her back into its depths. But now she had to stay composed. Panic would only make things worse. Someone groaned nearby, and Min-ji, gritting her teeth, crawled toward the sound. It was Lee Hyun-suk, the modest oceanologist she had befriended in the first days of the expedition. He was lying on his side, his head slightly raised, eyes shut tight. His shoulder was scraped raw against the sharp rocks, and a bruise darkened his forehead, but he was alive. Hyun-suk SSI, whispered Min-ji, touching his hand. Can you hear me? He nodded weakly. Pain twisted his face. A faint moan escaped his lips, but he opened his eyes and scanned the shore. Min-ji. He tried to say her name, choking on seawater still clinging to his lips. Are you okay? I think so, she replied, forcing herself to ignore the pain in her back and legs. What matters is that we're alive. We need to find the others. Where's Sun-woo? She noticed Hyun-suk's gaze shift past her, deeper along the shoreline. Min-ji turned and saw Park Sun-woo crouching at the water's edge. He must have regained consciousness first. His shoulders shook with heavy breathing, his dark hair matted with sand, his sports jacket torn in several places. Yet, despite it all, Sun-woo looked the most composed of the three. He was trying to stand, checking himself for serious injuries. Sun-woo. Min-ji called, though her voice was weakened by exhaustion. Are you all right? He turned. In his eyes flashed the familiar spark of determination she had often noticed when he argued with colleagues about geological formations or methods of collecting samples. I'm alive, he replied curtly. I'm checking the backpacks and what's left of our equipment. Nothing exploded, so some of the cargo might have washed ashore. The thought of equipment made Min-ji shiver. She hoped that at least some of her instruments for studying underwater flora and fauna, as well as the filtration system she had devised during preparations, had survived the crash. But first, they needed to make sure everyone was safe. As they talked of practical matters, each secretly asked the same question: what if no one finds us? What if we are stuck here forever? But none of them dared to say it aloud. Hyun-suk, wait. Let me look at your wound, she said, trying to assume the role of a field medic. She had basic first aid training from her student years. We need clean fabric to bandage it. There should be a first aid kit in my backpack. Hyun-suk suddenly brightened, struggling to sit up and scanning the shore. But I can't see it. I was holding it when we... He fell silent, the memory of the crash still too raw and painful. Let's check the beach, suggested Min-ji. Maybe the waves washed something nearby. While they spoke, Sun-woo had already examined the nearby stretch of wet sand. He lifted something resembling a case with torn straps. Encouraged, Min-ji, clenching her teeth against the pain, helped Hyun-suk to his feet. Together they slowly walked along the coast, searching for surviving luggage. The sun stood high, and the heat grew nearly unbearable. Yet the young, determined scientists had not lost their spirit. They had survived a plane crash, fate still favored them. Now the main thing was not to give up and to find a way to contact civilization before day turned into night. The shoreline here was littered with boulders and sharp rocks jutting from the sand. The surf crashed hard, leaving behind strips of dark seaweed and scattered debris. After a few dozen meters, Ming-ji spotted part of her equipment, a small sealed container with a dangling rubber handle. She rushed to it, ignoring the stabbing pain in her side. Opening the container, she sighed with relief. Inside were several vials of reagents and a small notebook where she recorded scientific ideas. The reagents for analyzing salinity and sampling marine flora were not vital for survival, but they were something, a link to her past life and scientific mission. Ming-ji. Over here, called Sun-woo. He stood further along the shore, bent over something heavy. I think I found one of the backpacks. Leaning on the container, she hurried toward him. Hyun-suk, limping, tried to help as well. The backpack was soaked with seawater, but inside they found several cans of food, water purification tablets, and a small rechargeable lamp, something that could be extremely useful at night. That's my backpack, Hyun-suk noted, awkwardly crouching down. I packed spare batteries for the instruments and some vitamin capsules. Damn, here's the first aid kit. He carefully pulled out a plastic bag marked with a red cross. Inside were bandages, antiseptics, and plasters. Ming-ji immediately knelt beside him and began treating his wound. She wasn't a medic, but she could at least prevent infection. The scrape on his shoulder was deep but not fatal. Hyun-suk tried not to cry out as she poured antiseptic over it, only hissing softly through his teeth. Hold still, she muttered grimly, carefully applying the bandage. We need to find shelter from the sun as soon as possible. And check if there's fresh water nearby. Sun-woo, standing guard with his back to them, studied the part of the island covered with palms and vines. We can head into the jungle, but I don't know if it's safe. We need to be cautious. Still, we'll have to find a freshwater source, he said with a heavy sigh. Even if we have purification tablets, we can't rely on such a small supply forever. Ming-ji finished the bandage and stood. Let's explore the nearby thickets together. This island looks volcanic. There might be a stream somewhere inland. If we're lucky, we may even find a cave. Volcanic islands often have karst cavities or small grottos. I was just about to start with surveying the terrain, said Sun-woo, a note of relief in his voice. Geological research was his calling, and if he could apply his knowledge, he would feel more confident. And I'll keep a close eye on the flora and fauna, Ming-ji added. Maybe I'll find something edible, and at the same time check for dangerous insects or snakes. They exchanged glances. It seemed a sense of unity was slowly enveloping the three of them. The tragedy that had nearly claimed their lives bound them together, making them stronger. But none of them could imagine how harsh the trials ahead would be. The sun stood at its zenith. The humid heat rolled over them like a suffocating wave, and each at some point felt as though their consciousness might falter from overheating. They needed to find shade as soon as possible. The group ventured deeper into the thickets. A narrow trail led among tall palms, vines, and thorny bushes. The stridulation of cicadas echoed all around, branches cracked underfoot, and colorful birds occasionally fluttered up. At times, large insects emerged from the foliage, beetles perhaps, or unknown creatures of the local fauna. Ming-ji walked in front, trying to move as cautiously as possible. Behind her followed Hyun-suk, still limping but determined not to lag behind. Bringing up the rear was Sun-woo, stopping every few steps to look back, as if to memorize the path and ensure no one was following them. After about 20 minutes, the jungle thinned, and they emerged at the base of a low hill. The hill was made of dark basalt rock, a hallmark of volcanic origin. One side dropped steeply toward the sea, forming a cliff, while the other sloped gently down into a valley covered with dense vegetation. Here, the air grew slightly cooler thanks to a light breeze. Ming-ji wiped the sweat from her forehead and sat to rest under broad leaves. We should climb to the top, suggested Sun Wu, estimating the hill to be 40 or 50 meters high. From there we might get a view of the whole coastline. All right, Mingji nodded. Once we take a look around, we can decide where to go next. The climb took about half an hour. Though the hill was not high, it was steep, and Mingji slipped on wet stones a couple of times. At one point Sun Wu reached out his hand. She felt the firm grasp helping her hold steady, and for a brief instant something hot flickered in her chest. Hyun-suk did his best to stay strong despite the pain in his leg. He spoke less, but his eyes were full of determination. From time to time he stopped to catch his breath and keep his balance. Mingji caught his gaze more than once. It was warm, as if assuring her, "I'll be fine. Thank you for caring." When they finally reached the top, a breathtaking view spread before them. The boundless ocean encircled the island on all sides, but the land was not nearly as small as it had seemed at first. Rocky ridges covered with dense forest rose in the island's center, while lighter sandy strips marked the coastline. Far away, along a slope, they thought they saw a waterfall, a pale white streak against the green. "There must be fresh water there," exclaimed Mingji, gazing at the waterfall. "Looks like a source we could use to stock up." "That's probably a stream," Sun Wu nodded, squinting. "It's not close, but if we go straight, we might reach it by mid-afternoon. Half a day." Hyun-suk murmured, glancing around. "That means we'll either have to set out right away or make camp on the way." "I think we should reach it before dark," said Sun Wu. "We won't survive without water." Mingji nodded. The plan sounded reasonable. She scanned the horizon again, hoping to see a ship or at least smoke that might indicate the island was inhabited. But all that shimmered was the endless line of sea. The hopeless view squeezed her heart. "Okay, let's move," she said, trying to put cheer into her voice, though she already felt it fading inside. The descent was quicker but just as exhausting as the climb. They had to step carefully on the damp stones to avoid slipping into the undergrowth. Sometimes they used tree trunks as supports. Hyun-suk clung almost constantly to Sun Wu's or Mingji's sleeve to keep his balance. His injured leg throbbed worse with each step. "Let's take a break," Mingji suggested when she saw Hyun-suk's legs nearly give out beneath him. "I need to check your bandage anyway, and we should eat something. We can't forget about food." Their lunch was the barest imaginable, a couple of cans of preserved food that had miraculously survived in one backpack, and a little water salvaged from the wreck that morning. Then they found coconuts. Mingji and Hyun-suk had no experience cracking them, but Sun Wu managed with a rock and sharp shard, opening one enough for them to sip some coconut water. The juice was refreshing. Just a few gulps each, but it eased the burning thirst under the blazing sun. During the short break, Mingji changed Hyun-suk's bandage. No infection was visible yet. She offered him extra vitamin tablets to support his immune system. They exchanged a few words while resting. "Do you think there's a chance search teams are already out looking for us?" Hyun-suk asked, peering through the leaves at the distant sky. "In plane crashes, the distress signal usually goes out automatically." "Hard to say," admitted Sun Wu. "If the black box survived, they'll eventually track our coordinates. But we can't rely on that." Mingji sighed. "I just hope they find us before we—" "This island isn't small, and living here won't be simple unless we give it everything we've got." Remembering the purpose of their expedition, they realized that in some ways they had ended up in an open-air laboratory. Everything they had once dreamed of studying in theory was here. But now their own survival and their scientific curiosity were so tightly interwoven it was hard to tell one from the other. When their short rest ended, the trio moved on. Ahead lay a difficult and exhausting trek to the waterfall, where they hoped to find fresh water and perhaps a place for a temporary camp. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they finally heard the sound of rushing water. The murmur filtered through the thick foliage like a modest but long-awaited melody. Mingji, walking slightly ahead, pointed to a gap in the trees. From there drifted a cool, moist breeze. A few more steps, and they reached a small waterfall cascading into a pond about 10 meters across. Crystal clear water tumbled over slick stones, breaking into sprays of mist. "Thank heavens," whispered Hyun-suk, his voice filled with relief and joy, as though he had stumbled upon paradise itself. Looks like we won't die of thirst. Sun Wu immediately stepped to the pond's edge. He carefully dipped his hand into the water, brought it to his lips, and sipped. Then he spat it out. Fresh, he judged. But we should still purify it. We're taking a risk, but far less than if we had no choice at all. Mingji nodded and pulled out purification tablets from her backpack. Meanwhile, Hyunsuk sat on a boulder and closed his eyes, letting his leg rest. The journey had drained them to the limit, and they all knew the least they could do now was replenish their water supply and find a safe place to spend the night. We can stay here for the night, she said, peering into a half-shaded grotto. We'll need to clear the ground of branches and make bedding out of leaves. But it's better than sleeping under the open sky. Sun Wu and Hyunsuk inspected the shelter and agreed. A faint sense of hope wrapped around the three of them. They had water, and that meant they could at least rest and continue trying to make contact with the outside world. Perhaps later they would think about a fire, smoke, a signal. But for now, the most urgent task was to settle in. When everyone was busy gathering large leaves, tearing off lianas, and laying down bedding, the colors of sunset began to glow. The sky turned purple-orange, the water in the pond became crimson, as if nature itself was showing them its incredible beauty. Mingji paused for a moment, admiring the landscape, and involuntarily thought, how can such magnificence coexist with the horror we went through? She wiped a drop of sweat from her forehead and noticed that Sun Yu was standing a little farther away, also gazing at the fiery sky. Looking at his silhouette, she felt a vague stirring in her chest. After all, he had always seemed like a leader to her, someone who took responsibility in critical situations. He managed to stay composed even now, when most people would have fallen into despair. She felt respect for him and an inexplicable warmth in her heart. Back at university, she had heard of him as a natural-born geologist, a man obsessed with his research, but she had never imagined how strong his spirit truly was. Just as she was thinking about this, Hyunsuk's voice came from the grotto. Mingji, look, I managed to spread the clothes so they'll dry by morning. Startled, she hurried to him, brushing away unnecessary thoughts. Deep inside, she knew she had no right to indulge in romantic dreams now. They all faced a difficult ordeal. Yet tenderness had already taken root in her heart, and she realized that on an island cut off from the world, feelings could easily sharpen. Night fell, as though draping them in dark silk. In the jungle and near the waterfall, unseen creatures stirred, frogs, cicadas, unknown birds. The sky was covered with bright stars, rarely so visible in civilization because of city lights. Here they shone like diamonds, and sometimes one fell, leaving behind a glowing trail. Using makeshift tools, Sun Yu tried to build a fire, rubbing sticks together, aided by a rag soaked in coconut shavings. After long effort, a smoldering spark grew brighter, and soon their small camp was bathed in warm orange light. Looks like it worked, he murmured happily, tossing a few more branches into the flames. Better than nothing. Hyunsuk and Mingji settled nearby. The night chill after the scorching day felt like another test for their exhausted bodies. Mingji leaned against the grotto wall, feeling the ache in her muscles slowly give way to weary but welcome rest. What we really need are blankets, Hyunsuk remarked. I wonder if we'll be able to make something like that out of leaves. We'll have to try, Mingji smiled. We're here for real, unless a miracle happens. For a moment silence fell. Amid the winds howling and the insects' buzz, each sank into thought. I suggest we take turns keeping watch. Sun Yu broke the uneasy pause. I'll take the first part of the night. Mingji, then you. Hyunsuk, the last. We need to tend the fire and make sure no predators approach our shelter. Agreed, Mingji replied. Then I'll sleep for a couple of hours, otherwise I'll be useless tomorrow. All right, Hyunsuk nodded. Let's try to rest. We'll switch later. And so they decided. Mingji lay down on a layer of palm leaves, covered herself with the jacket they had salvaged from a bag. The waterfall's murmur lulled her, and the fire gave life-saving warmth. Just before closing her eyes, she caught a glimpse of Sun Yu staring intently into the darkness. Suddenly, she felt relatively safe, as if he could drive away all the dangers of this mysterious island. Morning greeted them with distant thunder. The sky over the island was covered in gray clouds, and strong wind rustled through the leaves. Ming-Ji woke before dawn, relieved Hyun-Sok on watch, and caught the sound of heavy breaking in the jungle, as if trees were being torn up by the roots. Just what we need, another hurricane, she groaned, rising to throw branches into the smoldering fire. We'd better prepare for a downpour. Sun-Yu and Hyun-Sok woke almost at the same time, feeling the first raindrops on their faces. Dark gray clouds loomed threateningly overhead. They realized the rocky overhang was not the safest shelter if the rain became heavy and the waterfall overflowed. We need to build some kind of canopy, Sun-Yu ordered, listening to the growing thunder. We can secure large leaves with lianas, support them with branches. That should protect us at least a little. Without wasting time, Ming-Ji and Hyun-Sok searched for materials. Wet, slippery trunks made gathering branches difficult. After about half an hour, they had assembled a kind of tent, reinforced with stones at the base so the wind wouldn't carry it away. As soon as they finished, the real downpour began. Water poured from the sky in torrents, forcing them to hide under the makeshift canopy with their backpacks and salvaged equipment. The blazing sun was replaced by the darkness of storm clouds, spray flying everywhere, the roar of water drowning their voices. This rain could last from an hour to a whole day, Hyun-Sok shouted, trying to outcry the thunder. In the tropics, anything is possible. Shivering in a jacket, Ming-Ji watched rainwater streams running down the lianas. Confusion reigned in her heart. They needed fire, but the flame was dying in wind and damp despite all efforts. Breakfast would have to wait, along with their plans to explore the island further. Sun-Yu crouched at the edge of the canopy, fists clenched, watching to see if the lake was rising. His shoulders shook from cold and anxiety. When a flash of lightning lit up the grotto, Ming-Ji caught a fleeting trace of worry in his eyes. Surely, he felt powerless against the elements. Who wouldn't? By noon the rain finally weakened. The storm moved into the mountains, leaving only faint thunder in the distance. But the soil had turned into a muddy swamp, and torrents of water still rushed at the base of the waterfall. Disgusting, Ming-Ji muttered, feeling cold drops running down her neck. But it could have been worse if the hurricane had struck in full force. We need to check if the equipment is damaged, Hyun-Sok said, noticing one of the bags lying in a puddle. Running a hand through his wet hair, Sun-Yu smirked. Looks like our electronics are finished. Even if they were in plastic containers, this much moisture probably ruined everything. We'll have to do without complex equipment, Sun-Yu said grimly. But we must check if the signal devices survived. We had a set of signal flares, didn't we? Hyun-Sok nodded. Yes, but I think it was lost with the other baggage during the crash. He fell silent under Sun-Yu's piercing gaze. What do you mean think? You were responsible for part of the cargo, Sun-Yu snapped, uncharacteristic aggression in his voice. Ming-Ji raised her eyebrows. She was surprised that the usually calm Park Sun-Yu allowed himself such an accusation. Sun-Yu, wait. This isn't the time to argue about who was responsible for what, she gently defended Hyun-Sok. We need to think about getting out. Even if the flares are gone, we can send smoke signals if we find a way to build a large fire on the shore. But Sun-Yu didn't cool down at once. Sorry, it's just, he rubbed his face. I'm worried that we're running out of ways to attract rescuers' attention. We may be stuck here for a long time and I feel responsible for all of us. At that, Hyun-Sok nodded conciliatorily. He understood it was not worth fanning the conflict. Besides, he had his own worries, his leg still hurt, the bandage was soaked, and he needed new treatment. Ming-Ji averted her gaze. Something inside her stirred uneasily, the wounds inflicted by stress now manifested as unending irritability. And if Park Sun-Yu, the reliable geologist, was already snapping, it meant tension was starting to override common sense. They still had many moments ahead when they would have to swallow grievances and stick together. By noon, they managed to light a fire, on which they slightly dried their clothes and prepared a meager meal, leftover canned food and some modest plants resembling wild spinach, which Ming-Ji had cautiously gathered nearby. While they ate, the conversation turned to possible signals for rescuers. Ming-Ji thought they should wait for good weather and go to the shore to make a large signal fire. Hyun-Sok suggested waiting until the waves calmed and then trying to swim a little further to assess the currents and possibly locate parts of the plane wreck with the radio beacon. Sun-Yu objected, saying it was far too dangerous. It's pointless to go into the ocean now, he said, glancing at Hyunsuk. You can barely walk, and there could be sharks and unpredictable currents. But we're scientists, Hyunsuk countered. We need to at least understand the terrain around us. Maybe there's a small nearby islet, or parts of the plane are still afloat. The radio beacon could have detached and surfaced all right. We need time to think it through. Minji felt tension growing between the men. On one side, charismatic Sun Yu, taking on the leadership role. On the other, quiet but brilliant Hyunsuk, who sometimes came up with ideas and sincerely believed in their value. She found herself caught in the middle. Trying to smooth things over, she suggested, "Let's do this. We have a few days while we settle in. Let's see how the weather behaves. If the storm subsides, we can try a small reconnaissance along the coast. If there's any risk, we'll immediately return to the shore." Sun Yu nodded slowly, but something told Minji he wasn't thrilled with the idea. Most likely, his inner sense of responsibility, or perhaps jealousy over the possibility of Hyunsuk and Minji diving together, was guiding him. After lunch, they decided to explore the surroundings to see what resources were nearby. They moved along the cliff. Water from a waterfall knocked them off balance, forcing them to hold onto wet outcrops. Behind a transparent veil of spray and foam, they discovered a small crevice in the rock leading inward. Inside, semi-darkness prevailed, and Minji took out a flashlight salvaged from Hyunsuk's backpack. In the dim beam, they noticed the cave was quite spacious, with a high ceiling adorned with stalactites. The floor was covered with shallow puddles and stones, some slippery with algae. "Wow," Hyunsuk whispered, examining the rock formations. "There might be an interesting biotope here due to constant humidity. Perfect for living," added Sun Yu, surveying the uneven floor. "We just need to clear some space. But if the water level rises, we need to check how high it gets during heavy rain," agreed Minji, glancing cautiously into the darkness of the cave. "Otherwise, we could simply drown in the next downpour." As they moved deeper, a rustling sound came from among the stalactites and stalagmites. Minji froze. The flashlight beam caught something slipping behind a rock ledge. She let out a short scream when she saw a pair of glinting eyes. Apparently, it was a large rat or a small mammal, a local cave dweller. "Calm down," Sun Yu whispered, stepping forward. "Looks like just a rat." Hyunsuk exhaled in relief. "Good, not a predator. There are no signs of snakes here, but we still need to be careful." On the way back, as the waterfall spray hit their faces again, Minji noticed Sun Yu quietly speaking to Hyunsuk. Due to the noise, she couldn't catch the words, but looking at their faces, she saw clear signs of tension. There seemed to be rivalry between them, perhaps forced, perhaps internal. She realized she had become an unwitting cause of this tension. The next day, the weather improved significantly. The sun rose in a clear sky, and the pond at the waterfall calmed. Minji and Hyunsuk, after consulting, decided that inspecting the shallow area near the shore might be useful. Perhaps some wreckage from their scientific equipment or other valuable items remained. Sun Yu, after hearing the idea, reluctantly agreed but insisted on staying on the shore to monitor safety. "At the slightest danger, you signal me, and I'll pull you out," he said. His voice was dry, which concerned Minji, as he had recently been willing to dive himself. They decided not to escalate the situation. Hyunsuk put on the diving goggles and fins salvaged from the backpack. Minji prepared as well. She had only a mask and snorkel, enough to stay on the surface and inspect the bottom. "Be careful," Sun Yu said quietly as Minji approached the water. "There could be currents and reefs. If anything happens, get out immediately." She nodded, lowering her gaze. It suddenly seemed to her that his voice carried not just concern, but jealousy, perhaps at the idea of her spending time again with Hyunsuk, who clearly liked her. But Minji didn't want to dwell on that feeling. Survival was at stake, and everyone had to do what they could. The water was cool, sunlight illuminating stones and algae. Hyunsuk swam effortlessly, as if forgetting the pain in his leg. Minji, holding her snorkel, followed. Underwater, a mesmerizing world unfolded, and soon they noticed a piece of rusty plane fuselage, but nothing useful was nearby. Further on, they found a case stuck between rocks. It looked intact and might hold something valuable. Hyunsuk tried to pull it free, unsuccessfully. Holding her breath, Ming-ji tugged on the case herself and felt a sharp pain in her finger, as if bitten. Startled, she almost dropped the snorkel. Panicking, she recoiled, surfaced, and gasped for air. The pain in her finger was sharp, like a burn. Noticing something was wrong, Hyunsuk swam over. "What happened?" "I think something bit me," Ming-ji hissed, raising her hand from the water. She saw her finger bleeding, with 2 tiny punctures. "Maybe a fish or a crab." Hyunsuk tensed. "Show me." "Hopefully it's not a venomous eel or sea snake." Sun Yu, already noticing the problem from the shallow water, hurried over. "Ming-ji, are you okay?" he shouted, helping her out of the water. On dry land, Ming-ji crouched, shivering from waves of pain shooting through her finger. The wound didn't seem deep, but it throbbed as if venom were spreading under the skin. Sun Yu grabbed her hand. "We need to rinse it and apply antiseptic." "Hyunsuk, get the first aid kit." Hyunsuk rushed to fetch it. Sun Yu, trying to calm her, held her shoulders and pressed her to his chest, murmuring quiet words of reassurance. Ming-ji looked up at him for a moment, tears in her eyes from pain and fear. She felt his strong body give a sense of safety, and the closeness strangely soothed her. Hyunsuk returned with the kit. While searching for antiseptic and bandages, Sun Yu wanted to rinse the wound with seawater, but Hyunsuk stopped him. "Better use fresh water. Seawater might cause infection." They used water from the waterfall and then applied antiseptic. Ming-ji breathed heavily, trying to endure the pain. Over time, the burning sensation eased slightly, but fear remained. On an island without professional care, any wound could become deadly if infected. After finishing the bandage, Sun Yu lingered, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary, then stood up and looked at Hyunsuk. "Did you manage to pull out that case?" "No," Hyunsuk replied, flustered. "We almost got it, but," he glanced at Ming-ji. "I didn't want to leave you when you—" Sun Yu clenched his fists. It seemed he was struggling with his emotions. On one hand, retrieving the case could be critically important. On the other, Ming-ji's health was also at stake. A heavy sigh broke the silence. "All right. The case can wait. First, we need to make sure Ming-ji doesn't get worse." He gently helped her to her feet, while Hyunsuk, frowning, headed to the fire to warm some water and reapply the bandage if needed. Ming-ji, looking up at Sun Yu, thought that under normal circumstances she would probably feel embarrassed, but here on the island, everything seemed exaggeratedly intense. His hands, his closeness, his decisiveness, yet she couldn't forget Hyunsuk's kindness and understanding gaze, the one she often shared her thoughts on science and dreams with. Now she realized how important her connection with both men was, and how inevitable their rivalry. The evening passed relatively calmly. Sun Yu tried to rekindle the fire, which had nearly gone out in the rain. He managed to gather some dry branches from the cave, and soon the fire crackled warmly again. Hyunsuk helped rebandage Ming-ji with fresh gauze, suggesting she take more antibiotics just in case. "Thank you," she said, averting her eyes. Something strange and heavy lingered in the atmosphere. It seemed everyone was afraid to speak too much, afraid of exposing rising emotions. At one point, Sun Yu suggested, "Maybe we should divide responsibilities. I'll look for the best place for the camp and start building a shelter in the cave. Hyunsuk can handle fishing nets or check the pond. And Ming-ji can help well, with what she can, considering her injured hand." "I can do a lot," Ming-ji insisted. "My injury isn't that bad." Hyunsuk supported her. "Yes, it's just a cut. Hopefully, it'll be fine. By the way, Ming-ji knows plants better than we do. She could scout around for something edible." Sun Yu shot him a brief glance. "Fine. But don't go too far alone," he said to Ming-ji. "I don't want another accident." In his words, she read both reluctance to put her in danger and a quiet jealousy that Hyunsuk might accompany her. Either way, the plan for the next few days was set. In the morning, Ming-ji woke earlier than the others. Her hand hurt, but it was tolerable. She decided not to wake the men and quietly stepped out to the waterfall to breathe fresh air. Sunlight barely filtering through the leaves painted golden patches on the wet stones. The clean water of the falling stream shimmered in the morning light. She sat on a flat boulder, lost in thought, wondering what it would be like to return to civilization. Could she continue her scientific career as if nothing had happened? Or had the island permanently changed her priorities? A solitary figure approached from behind. It was Hyunsuk. He quietly sat next to her, careful not to disturb his injured leg. For a moment they were silent, listening to the water. "How's your hand?" he finally asked, looking at the drops hitting the rocks rather than at her. "It hurts, but I'll survive," she replied. "Thanks for asking." Silence again. Then, as if gathering courage, Hyunsuk spoke. "You know, even before the flight, I was glad we were on this expedition together. I thought we had similar views on what science is for. We both love the ocean, research." And he paused, hesitating as if afraid to say too much. Minji turned her head and looked at him. She noticed the softness in his gaze, a natural kindness she had long observed. "Hyunsuk SSI," she said quietly. "I've also valued our friendship greatly. The way we dove into the water, discussed marine creatures, I felt freer than ever." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes I think that if things had gone differently, we could have grown even closer. But now, in these circumstances," she understood what he meant without him finishing. Minji knew their friendly relationship was beginning to turn into something more. Yet there was also Sunyu, who clearly had feelings for her. She shivered inwardly at the thought of having to choose. Perhaps the island would decide for her. "I don't want our feelings to interfere with survival," she said, trying to sound calm though her heart raced. "We need to support each other and stick together." Hyunsuk nodded, but a shadow of disappointment passed in his eyes. He had likely expected a different response to his hints. At that moment, Sunyu emerged from the cave. Seeing them sitting together, his expression showed puzzlement. Approaching, he loudly cleared his throat to draw attention. "Ah, there you are. I thought you'd gone into the forest. I wanted to discuss today's plan." Minji and Hyunsuk stood. A spark of tension passed between the two men, immediately noticeable to Minji. It was as if each was testing the other's eyes for signs of defeat or envy. But they didn't argue. It was time to work. Each day on the island gained routine. In the morning, Minji searched for fruits and checked berries, Hyunsuk tried fishing in the pond and near the waterfall using a liana net, and Sunyu gathered thick branches for the future shelter. In the evenings, they returned to the waterfall to rest, and contradictions often emerged. Hyunsuk remembered family and colleagues, Sunyu spoke of the mission's necessity, and Minji tried to support both, though sometimes she withdrew into herself. By the third day, their cave shelter began to feel like a real home. Sunyu secured lianas and leaves, creating walls and a space for the fire, while Hyunsuk found a way to collect water droplets in a container. But with progress, tension grew. Each construction decision sparked arguments between Sunyu and Hyunsuk, and Minji tried to maintain balance, growing weary from constant conflicts. "We need to tie the upper beams," Hyunsuk snapped. "Otherwise, during the next downpour, water could leak. Better reinforce the lower part, so the soil isn't washed away." Sunyu insisted. "You should know this, you're an oceanographer, not a builder." Minji intervened. "Guys, let's do both. We need to divide the construction stages instead of arguing. We need both your knowledge." Gradually they reached consensus, but cracks in their relationship seemed to deepen. Both Minji and Hyunsuk noticed that in such moments, Sunyu looked at them with particular irritation, as if sensing he was losing exclusive closeness to Minji. On the fourth day, they finally decided to return to the shore where they first landed after the crash. There, they planned to light a large signal fire, hoping passing ships or planes would notice the smoke. Sunyu devised a plan. By noon, they would gather enough dry branches carried from the cave to create a fire signal after dark. They moved cautiously, trying not to get lost in the jungle. Along the way, they found patches of edible fruits, like mangoes. Using her biological knowledge, Minji confirmed they were safe to eat. Excited, they collected a full bunch to eat on the shore. When they reached the place where they had first regained consciousness after the crash, Minji felt a sharp pang in her chest from memories. Everything looked lifeless, yet strangely familiar. Pieces of the fuselage and luggage thrown by the waves had nearly disappeared. Apparently, the coastal currents had carried them out to the open sea. And yet hope for rescue lingered as they gazed at the horizon. Sun Yu, choosing the flattest spot, said, "This is where we'll light the fire. We need to gather as much wood as possible and pile on plenty of wet leaves and greenery so the smoke is thick." Hyun-sok, again feeling bossed around, smirked but began collecting branches. Min-ji also started helping, though her hand still ached slightly. She tried not to focus on the small stabs of pain. The day passed in labor. By sunset, they had built a large pile of kindling, surrounded by stones. The sun sank behind the ocean, painting the sky in blood-red hues. It was a magnificent yet slightly ominous sight. "Ready?" Sun Yu asked, looking at his companions. "At twilight, we light the fire and toss on greenery. If anyone's out at sea, they might see us." Their hearts beat in unison. Though hope was scarce, none of them wanted to miss this one chance. The air seemed electrified. When dusk fully embraced the shore, Sun Yu struck a spark from the stones, after first piling dry moss and tinder. After several attempts, a small flame ignited, quickly growing in the wind. Adding more kindling, they watched the fire surge upward, casting trembling shadows of the three figures. Min-ji and Hyun-sok threw bundles of wet leaves and greenery on top, creating thick white smoke that rose in clouds toward the sky. The surf roared, and the flames danced with the gusts. All they could do now was wait and hope. "Maybe someone will see it," Hyun-sok whispered bitterly, sitting on a rock. His gaze was fixed on the dark sea. Min-ji sat down next to him, wrapped in the cloak salvaged from the plane. Or a plane might spot this smoke. Sun Yu stood with his arms crossed over his chest. The flames reflected in his eyes, and Min-ji thought he looked like a lone warrior keeping watch over a fortress wall. Suddenly, he noticed her gaze and crouched next to her, wrapping his arms around his knees. "If no one notices us, we'll have to find other ways. Maybe when the sea calms, we can build a raft." The idea of building a raft sounded insane, but what choice did they have? Deep down, each of them knew that their chances of rescue were dwindling with every passing day. No one knew for sure if a search team had even been sent. Perhaps no one had been informed at all. Min-ji felt fear tighten her throat. She wanted to lean on someone who could comfort her, but pride and embarrassment kept her from reaching either Hyun-sok or Sun Yu. Yet, when the wind picked up, she felt Hyun-sok tentatively place a hand on her shoulder, as if trying to warm her. Sun Yu sat silently beside her, but she noticed his muscles tense at the gesture. The night stretched long and cold. They took turns keeping watch by the fire, maintaining the flames and smoke. No ships or planes appeared on the horizon or in the sky. It seemed as though they were alone in the entire universe. By dawn, the fire had almost gone out. There were no signs of rescue. Min-ji felt a bitter pang of disappointment. They had put in so much effort, and in return, only the merciless silence of the ocean. Sun Yu stood, stretching his stiff shoulders. "We need to decide what's next. Stay here or return to the cave." Hyun-sok replied quietly. "We have supplies of food and water there. And a fire, if it hasn't gone out." Min-ji remained silent, knowing that another sleepless night waiting for a miracle was unbearable. Most likely, they would have to rebuild a long-term survival plan. After a few minutes, they began gathering their things. The sun slowly rose over the water, and in its yellow-pink light, the shadows of the three scientists stretched long across the sand. Suddenly, Sun Yu, walking ahead, stopped abruptly and turned to Min-ji and Hyun-sok. "Listen, we don't have much time to keep playing games. We need to understand who is responsible for what." "If," he hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "What do you mean?" Hyun-sok asked warily, frowning slightly. Sun Yu sighed heavily. "I see how close you're getting to Min-ji. I just want," he looked at her, unsure how to say what was on his mind. "I have to take care of her as the team leader and won't let you put her in risky situations. Like yesterday, when you were diving and she got injured." Min-ji gasped. "Wait, that was our decision. I wanted to dive myself, it was my initiative." Hyun-sok lifted his head. "What are you even talking about, Sun Yu? We're both adults. You're not the one to tell us what to do." Sun Yu clenched his fists. No, I am. Because you forget that the success of all of us depends on each person. And if Minji had been hurt worse, it would have been the end of our hopes. We can't manage without her knowledge and skills. Minji felt a flash of indignation burn inside her. On one hand, she understood that Sun Yu was worried about her, but the patronizing tone in his words made her uncomfortable. Hyunsuk smirked crookedly. Ah, so the problem is we can't be together without your permission? Listen, that's going too far. If you're so worried, why didn't you go underwater with us yourself? Sun Yu's eyes flashed dangerously. I had to guard the shore in case you got into trouble. Or do you think you're the infallible hero? Word for word, their voices rose to shouts. Minji ran between them, trying to separate them. Stop. Both of you. What's happening to you? We're trying to survive, not fight. But the men, wound up with fatigue, fear, and hidden feelings for Minji, could not stop immediately. Their argument resembled a storm that had been brewing for a long time. In the end, Hyunsuk spun around angrily and walked along the shore, while Sun Yu remained standing, breathing heavily. Minji, touched and frightened, approached him. Sun Yu, why? He turned away, unable to answer immediately. Then, pressing his lips together, he said, Sorry. I just don't want to lose you, both of you. But especially you. I feel, he didn't finish. But Minji understood that this conflict wasn't just about leadership. On the island, their feelings had intensified, turning into a tangled knot of passion, jealousy, and fear. She gently touched his hand. Let's go. We need to return to the camp and talk calmly with Hyunsuk. We're all at our limit. Sun Yu stayed silent, only nodding, softened by her touch. The problem was unresolved, but in her eyes, he saw so much compassion and concern that his anger gradually began to subside. They caught up with Hyunsuk near the undergrowth leading to the island's interior. He was sitting on a boulder, staring at the waves. Minji, holding Sun Yu's hand, approached him. I'm sorry. We're all just. Hyunsuk waved tiredly. I'm not mad. I understand that Sun Yu is worried. And I'm to blame myself for losing my temper. A tense silence hung between the men. Finally, Sun Yu stepped forward. Forgive me for what I said. I shouldn't have reacted that way. Hyunsuk was silent for a long time, then nodded wearily. All right. We're forced to stick together anyway. But that doesn't mean I agree with you. Minji felt a wave of relief. Even if the truce was temporary, it gave them a chance to stay together. As they returned to the cave at sunset, each focused on their task. Hyunsuk avoided meeting her gaze, and Sun Yu checked the ropes. After a dinner of fish and fruit, they went to sleep, hoping for peace. But by midnight, a new storm broke out. Wind tore into the cave, thunder shook the cliffs, and the waterfall's waters surged and roared inside. Streams ran down the walls, and Minji shivered from the cold. Suddenly, a stone dislodged and fell near their sleeping area. All three jumped up. Sun Yu assessed the situation. The water is eroding the cave ceiling. We need to move deeper or get outside. Hyunsuk grabbed a backpack. Outside, we risk being hit by strong gusts. Better to move further in, the ceiling seemed stronger there. They moved the fire deeper into the cave, but soon water dripping from the stalactites blocked the exit. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the level rose, and the three were trapped. In the darkness, where only flashes of lightning revealed the walls, anxiety turned into fear. Sun Yu, holding a flashlight, led them deeper. Carrying backpacks above their heads, they found a ledge resembling a small balcony. Hyunsuk climbed first, helped Minji, then Sun Yu pulled himself up. Here it was slightly drier, but the water below kept rising, and every moment reminded them of imminent danger. What if the water reaches here too? Whispered Hyunsuk, looking at Sun Yu. Then Sun Yu didn't finish. He didn't know the answer. Minji pressed against the rock, realizing that their entire camp, all their hard work, was collapsing in a single night. And that they might have to either break through outside into the hurricane or stay here, and a thunderclap, as if right at the entrance, shook the ground, and part of the ceiling collapsed with a crash. A wave splashed over them but didn't knock them down. Ming-ji screamed, pressing herself between Sun Yu and Hyun-sok. The men, forgetting their quarrels, embraced her, three of them clinging together under the roar of the storm. Hours dragged painfully until the thunder subsided, the wind eased, and the water began to recede, finding a path deeper into the rock. Ming-ji felt relief as the level lowered. "We survived," Hyun-sok said hoarsely. Sun Yu allowed himself to exhale, and Ming-ji smiled for the first time. That night reconciled them, reminding them how precious every moment together was. At dawn, light pierced through the collapsed ceiling. The cave was filled with silt, some belongings were washed away, but the main thing, they were alive. Sun Yu helped Ming-ji and Hyun-sok down, their feet sinking into the mud. "We need to clear the debris," said Sun Yu, looking around. "Maybe some equipment survived." Hyun-sok agreed. Ming-ji, lifting her soaking wet backpack, felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Little remained, their makeshift beds were washed away, the fire was out, some food supplies carried off. But deep inside, she felt determination. "We survived this night. That means we can keep fighting. We've grown stronger." While clearing the cave, they accidentally discovered a passage previously hidden under fallen stones. The collapse apparently revealed a new section of the cave. Beyond it, a tunnel led deeper. They decided to finish tidying up their living area first and then explore the newly formed passage. By evening, they had set up a new fire pit near the entrance, dried what clothes they could, and gathered in a circle to discuss next steps. Surprisingly, the atmosphere became calmer. Sun Yu spoke softly, Hyun-sok no longer argued bitterly. Ming-ji listened, sensing a kind of understanding forming between them. "We almost died together," said Sun Yu, glancing at Ming-ji and then at Hyun-sok. "I guess this night showed that our quarrels are nothing compared to the forces of nature." "I'm sorry for being harsh." Hyun-sok gave a weak smile. "I'm sorry too. Let's just agree our little conflicts aren't worth risking our lives." Ming-ji, moved, nodded quietly. "Thank you for holding on to me to all three of us, when I thought we were lost." They sat side by side, watching the fire. No one spoke aloud about what was in their hearts, but even without words, it was clear, a fragile alliance was forming, where each had to acknowledge the other's importance. Yet the question remained, what feelings bound Ming-ji to the two men? And how long would this truce last, when the next trial could ignite jealousy and fear again? The next morning, all three decided to explore the new passage revealed by the collapse. Armed with flashlights and sticks, they cautiously moved through the narrow tunnel. Wet walls reflected the flashlight, creating the illusion of shimmering shadows. Ahead, the sound of dripping water could be heard. "Maybe there's another exit?" suggested Ming-ji, trying to walk carefully to avoid slipping. Sun Yu and Hyun-sok exchanged glances. The thought brought hope. If the tunnel led to the other side of the island or to the shore, they would have another chance to contact the outside world. They walked about 20 meters until the corridor opened into a small grotto, where stalactites and stalagmites formed curious shapes. From one wall, water trickled, apparently a spring. The water flowed into a small underground pool. "Wow," gasped Ming-ji, crouching down to examine it. "A real spring. And the water seems clean." Hyun-sok shone his flashlight on the water's surface. From the depths, the scales of small fish or crustaceans gleamed. "Maybe this is an underground river that leads to the ocean?" Sun Yu walked along the grotto, trying to find a continuation, but discovered only a dead end. The arches converged, and water only seeped through cracks. There was no exit, but a source of fresh water had been found, safer than the waterfall with its unpredictable level. "We can use this source," said Ming-ji excitedly. "If we make a small reservoir and a drainage system, we'll always have drinking water." Sun Yu agreed. "That's better than hauling water from outside during the rainy season." Hyun-sok touched the water with his hand. "Warm. Maybe there are thermal springs here. It'd be great to explore." Suddenly, while Hyun-sok examined the pool, Ming-ji felt Sun Yu quietly call her aside. "Ming-ji, can I have a word with you?" She stepped into a darker corner of the grotto, where the flashlight didn't shine directly on them. Slightly embarrassed, she asked. "Yes, what is it?" Sun Yu, leaning against the damp wall, lowered his gaze for a moment, then spoke softly. I have to tell you, I know we're in a difficult situation here. But after last night, I can't hide how I feel anymore. He faltered, as if losing his train of thought. The roar of water in the distance and the echo of the grotto amplified their voices. Mingji felt her heart skip a beat. She was afraid of what Sun Yu wanted to say, not knowing how to react. I'm not asking you to respond, he quickly added, noticing her tense expression. Just know this, you matter to me. Very much. And I can't watch you grow close to Hyunsuk. I'm sorry if it sounds selfish, but he didn't finish, because at that moment, Hyunsuk's voice echoed from deeper in the cave. Hey, are you two all right? I found something strange. The conversation ended abruptly. Mingji exhaled, still feeling her knees tremble. She feared the moment when she would have to sort out all the feelings, and feared hurting either of them. They hurried to Hyunsuk, who was pointing at a small bundle in the corner of the grotto. It turned out to be an old, partially rotted bag. Apparently, someone, or even a group, had hidden here long ago, though no one knew how many decades back. Inside the bag, they found a knife with a rusted blade and a small notebook, its pages partially waterlogged. The cover had faint characters, perhaps in the local language or something else. Mingji squinted, trying to decipher it. Looks like Japanese or Old Korean. I can't be sure. Sun Yu and Hyunsuk examined the find with interest. It was a thread to the island's history. Unfortunately, the notebook was so badly damaged by water and mold that reading any concrete entries was almost impossible. Maybe it's a sign that we're not the first people here, Hyunsuk noted. That means there's a chance the island isn't completely unknown. Someone might have already explored it. The discovery gave them a glimmer of hope that the island could appear on some maps, and search parties might eventually reach them. Several days passed in monotonous routines, with only rare moments of rest. The rains grew heavier as the monsoon season fully set in. Despite previous collapses, the cave remained a refuge. They divided it into zones for sleeping, the fire, and storage, gradually making it feel like a real home. One evening, as rain pounded the rocks, Hyunsuk confessed that he longed to see the stars again. It reminded him of his previous life, of the city. Mingji supported the idea, and their conversation revived both of them. The shared thirst for discovery brought them closer, giving strength to endure the hardships. Sun Yu, however, was quiet that evening. He watched from the side, trying to conceal his jealousy at how easily Mingji and Hyunsuk connected, discussing marine life, underground springs, and ways to gather water. Sometimes he felt like an outsider, and that feeling gnawed at him. At night, when Mingji and Hyunsuk went to check the water level at the waterfall, Sun Yu quietly followed. In the moonlight, he saw them talking, and Hyunsuk awkwardly touched her hand. Anger flared in his chest, his fists clenched instinctively, but he didn't intervene. He knew if he did, it would shatter their fragile alliance. In the morning, Sun Yu acted as if nothing had happened. He calmly helped Hyunsuk craft a new device for catching fish, and the tension seemed to dissolve. Mingji observed them with gratitude. She understood the self-control it cost both men. Their relationship remained a delicate balance between trust and hidden feelings, but it was that balance that kept them together. Then came a turn of events that changed everything. They had stopped waiting for miracles, immersed in the routine of finding food and improving their shelter, when early one morning Hyunsuk, stepping onto the beach outside the cave, suddenly shouted, "Hey, do you see that?" Sun Yu and Mingji ran over. On the horizon, through the morning mist, a tiny flicker shimmered. It seemed like a ship or an airplane, a faint point on the edge of visibility. Their hearts raced. Mingji rushed back into the cave for signaling equipment, only to remember it was all gone. Then Sun Yu and Hyunsuk hurriedly arranged a large fire at the cave entrance, using previously gathered branches. Mingji helped along the way, bringing green leaves. Within minutes, a thick column of smoke rose at the cave entrance. They waved their arms desperately, shouting, hoping someone out there would see. But the flicker on the horizon lasted only a few minutes before disappearing into the mist. Silence seemed to swallow their cries. Disappointment swept over them. Yet even a brief spark of hope charged them with new energy. Perhaps the ship was nearby. If they built a raft and tried to go out to sea, but the risk was deadly. At an emergency meeting in the cave, Mingji suggested, "Maybe this is our chance. If we build a raft, at least one of us could try to attract the ship's attention. It's better than sitting here and waiting for a miracle." Sun Yu shook his head. "It's too dangerous. The waves can turn deadly at any moment. The chance of dying in the ocean is very high." Hyunsuk, thinking, added, "But staying here for months is also a dead end. Our resources are limited." The argument flared. Sun Yu insisted on reinforcing the signal fire on shore and waiting. Hyunsuk supported the raft idea. Mingji wavered, unsure which plan was wiser. It became clear that implementing both plans at once was impossible. There was neither enough time nor enough resources. "Fine," Sun Yu said sharply. "I propose a compromise. We build the raft. If no ship or plane appears within a week, we decide whether to go." That was agreed. Yet each of them felt that eventually, a fateful choice would have to be made: who would risk venturing into the open sea, knowing the odds of returning were near zero. As they prepared the raft, tension rose again. They needed lots of wood, and vines collected across the island. During these days, they revisited the crash site, hopelessly searching for a surviving life jacket or anything useful, but without success. Mingji felt her nerves fraying under constant stress and scarce food. One day, when Sun Yu criticized her method of tying logs together, she snapped, "Stop arguing all the time. If we want to survive, we have to try everything." Sun Yu looked at her in shock. "I just meant your knot might be unreliable. Then do it better yourself." She shouted, turning and walking into the forest to calm down. Hyunsuk went after her, but she asked to be left alone for a few minutes. She wandered along the path among thorny bushes and tall palms, pressing her hand to her chest, feeling helpless. "We're losing our minds," she thought. "And I still can't figure out my feelings for both of them." In the evening, when she returned, Sun Yu silently handed her a coconut for a snack. Without a word, they shared the food, as if agreeing to a temporary truce. The raft took a week to prepare. It didn't look particularly sturdy, several logs tied with vines, an improvised sail from a piece of cloth, but it was better than nothing. Each contributed to building the little vessel. When the next day arrived, as agreed, they went to the shore with the raft, trying to see who would dare. The waves were high, and even one glance at the ocean showed how dangerous it was. "I'll go," Hyunsuk suddenly said. "I think of the three of us, I'm the least useful on the island. Sun Yu is strong, he can provide resources. Mingji is our only biologist, who knows what's safe to eat. And I—" "Stop," Mingji interrupted, shocked. "Don't say that. You are important to us." Sun Yu was equally stunned. "Hyunsuk, are you crazy? Into the open sea alone?" But Hyunsuk stood his ground. "It's our only chance to attract the ship. Maybe it won't approach the island because of the reefs. I can at least try to get closer, or—" Sun Yu grabbed his shoulders, squeezing painfully. "You could die." Hyunsuk pulled back. "So what? Don't you see how dangerous it is to just sit here? We may have only a couple of weeks before our food runs out. Or another storm could wash us away. I want Mingji to survive. You too." Hearing this, Mingji felt her heart ache. But she couldn't just let Hyunsuk risk certain death. "I'll go with you," she blurted out. "No," the men said in unison. Sun Yu, hesitating, cast a heavy look. "Mingji, we can't. We'd lose you both." Hyunsuk, with an almost tender expression, whispered, "You need to stay here." She turned away to hide her tears. Hyunsuk's words sounded desperate, but she knew he wasn't lying. He truly believed this was his sacrifice. "And you?" she asked, her voice caught in her throat. "Am I supposed to just watch you sail on this rickety raft into nowhere?" Hyunsuk placed his hand on her shoulder. "We don't know, maybe luck will be on our side. A few % chance, but it's still a chance. If I don't return," he hesitated, glancing at Sun Yu. "Please, take care of Mingji." Sun Yu, exhaling heavily, nodded. But still it's madness. They had no other plan. When everything was ready, Hyunsuk hugged Mingji tightly, pressing her to his chest. She felt his heart beating as fast as her own. Then he and Sun Yu silently shook hands, exchanging a look full of understanding and unspoken grief. Hyunsuk set off into the sea. The raft rocked on the waves, slowly drifting away from the island. Minji and Sun Yu stood nearby, holding torches, sending a last signal, hoping someone would see. Minji couldn't hold back her tears as the raft disappeared behind the wave crests. All that remained was to pray that fate would be merciful to Hyunsuk. Night fell quickly over the island. A strong wind blew from the ocean, and a hollow emptiness filled Minji's chest. Sun Yu was beside her, but what could they do? They lit a fire on the shore, marking a path back if Hyunsuk managed to return. But darkness enveloped everything, swallowing both hope and the sound of the waves. Minji, Sun Yu whispered softly, noticing her trembling. "It's cold here. Let's go into the cave." She clenched her teeth, hugging herself. "What if he comes back tonight? And we're not here?" "We'll leave the fire burning," Sun Yu suggested, adding more wood to it. "If he sees the light, he'll find his way to shore." Minji understood he was right. It was impossible to sit all night in the wind, with their strength already depleted. Yet her heart longed to stay at the water's edge, as if her gaze could somehow help Hyunsuk survive the raging ocean. Eventually, Sun Yu gently, almost forcefully, led her into the cave and spread warm leaves for her on the ground. He didn't lie down himself, instead tending the makeshift stone hearth. Minji, feeling the fire's warmth, sensed an unexpected closeness to Sun Yu through her tears and fatigue. He sat nearby, hesitant to touch her, yet his presence offered comfort. "We have to believe that Hyunsuk will be okay," he said softly. "Maybe he'll find a ship, alert them to us, and in a few days a rescue boat will return." His words were comforting, though tinged with idealism. Minji shyly pressed against him, finding support in his arms. And that embrace was both the pain of loss and a glimmer of hope. He didn't pull away, holding her tighter, letting her cry on his shoulder. In the silence of the cave, they realized that their lives were now bound together by shared grief, shared hope, and shared love, for the world beyond the island, and for the person who might already be gone or still struggling against the waves far out at sea. 3 long, tormenting days passed. Hyunsuk did not return. No ship appeared on the horizon. Minji tried to maintain a composed exterior, performing small tasks, while inside she wept silently. Sun Yu moved like a shadow, silently helping her gather supplies and keep watch. On the 4th day after Hyunsuk's departure, they went to the shore in the morning and saw the ocean raging mercilessly. High waves crashed against the rocks with a deafening roar, shouting despair. Minji clutched Sun Yu's hand, nearly fainting from hopelessness. If Hyunsuk was still alive, he has no chance now. But later that day, toward evening, as the wind shifted, a flicker appeared on the horizon again. Suddenly, they heard a distant roar, the sound of a motor. Sun Yu and Minji rushed to the signal fire, rekindled it, waving bundles of leaves. The flames leapt into the sky, smoke drifting over the shore. A boat approached, not a large vessel, but a small motorboat with people aboard. Through the roaring wind and turbulent waves, Minji and Sun Yu shouted, waving their arms, until they saw the boat signaling with its lights. Their heads spun with joy and disbelief. Rescue had finally come. When the boat reached a calmer cove on the far side of the island, 2 sailors landed to help the exhausted Minji and Sun Yu. Tears of gratitude blurred their vision. But the most shocking sight was Hyunsuk, alive, though in critical condition. He had been found in the open sea, half dead and exhausted, yet managed to report that 2 more survivors remained on the island. Seeing Hyunsuk, Minji could not hold back her tears. She pressed against him, unable to believe it was real. Sun Yu stood nearby, feeling a strange mix of emotions, joy that everyone survived, and pain at the new questions about how they would live from now on. One thing was certain, the island had changed their destinies forever. Upon returning to civilization, they were hailed as heroes, survivors of the unimaginable. Yet deep down, each knew nothing would ever be the same. The terrifying disaster and their shared struggle for survival had bound them together with ties stronger than any scientific expedition.